Consumer protection is also a priority of the Government of Ontario, and particularly so for the Minister of Finance. Since being elected in 2018, the Honourable Peter Bethlenfalvy has been a strong advocate of improving and strengthening our public service. Ensuring people from all walks of life have access to efficient public services when and where they need them. Now, as you know, the Minister is in the middle of the budget season, and taking time out to be with us today tells you how important he knows each of your sectors are to serving the financial needs of consumers, depositors, and plan sponsors and the economy of Ontario. It's now my privilege to invite the Minister to the stage to say a few words. Minister?
Well, good morning, and thank you, Joanne. That was a great overview of multiple things to think about, and principle-based regulation, consumer data, collaboration. You really hit some big themes in my career. I spent 15 years in New York and working for TD and Dominion Bond Rating Service, and I saw that overly prescriptive rules-based regulatory system versus Canada's and OSFI's principle-based regulation system really have different outcomes in the financial crisis of 2000-2009. So I really applaud the work of your board, Joanne, and your service to FSRA, to Mark White and the team, all the board members that are here today. Folks, this is a new organization. It's still a puppy, having been merged of two other organizations. So the amount of progress that has been made really in 5 years, Joanne, is really remarkable. And so I think a round of applause for FSRA would be well warranted at this point. Now, we do have a rule, Joanne, that any acronym is $5 in the jar, and I think you broke that rule twice, so you owe us $10. I do want to thank everyone for being here. You represent so much of the vital economic interests, financial interests of Ontario right here in this room, be it property and casualty, be it life, be it credit unions, be it pension, be it title protection, a range of industries. It's so important that we collaborate. I really like that point, and share data, because we have a common objective to have safety and soundness in our financial system, but to move forward in a very complex world that isn't getting any less complex. I'm going to have a few remarks here, and I'm going to frustrate my team because I go off script so often, and I think I'm about to do it again. I think the rapidly changing environment is what I look toward real leadership. How do we respond to a changing environment, a changing economy? We know the world is a very complex place, and boy, we're seeing complexity like we've never seen before, certainly not recently. And so the ability for an organization like the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, said that to avoid $5, by the way, is so critical. And I know we're going to continue on the provincial side to support the organization, to support the work that you do, and to support the many industries that are represented in this room. Change is a positive thing, but we have to do smart change, and I think that is what is occurring. I can tell you that from my perspective, I continue to work day in, day out. You're right, we have a budget that I have to table on or before March 31st, and I can tell you that we continue to invest in a responsible fiscal plan and a path to balance. I think that's really important, that we don't lose sight that the more debts and deficits we rack up, we're just burdening the next generation. And so intergenerational issues are really big as we think about how we manage the fiscal policy. And I can tell you that the environment that we're in, excuse me, higher inflation coming down, 2.9% in the last print, headline inflation, 2.7% actually in Ontario. is directionally positive, but still very high, and many people in this province feel like we're in a deep recession. You know, many of us are fortunate, but many, you know, to be able to afford the food, the cost of rent, the cost of a mortgage that's rolling over, the cost of day-to-day life is hurting many people. And in government, we have to be very mindful of that in the economy and the economic environment that we're in. Aujourd'hui, je peux dire que le gouvernement continue à investir de façon prudente et responsable pour bâtir une province forte, tout en restant sur la voie de l'équilibre budgétaire. Le marché du travail de l'Ontario a affiché de solides résultats en 2023 dans l'ensemble, mais il a récemment montré des signes de refléchement. Et malgré les défis qui perdurent, comme les taux d'intérêt élevés de la Banque du Canada et la pression inflationniste, l'économie de l'Ontario demeure résiliente et devrait continuer de croître en 2024, tout comme c'était le cas l'an dernier. You know, from day one, our government made a promise to the people and stakeholders of Ontario to govern in a way that is responsible and transparent. Joanne, you talked about collaboration and sharing data, and our government feels very strongly about data and using data. If you can't measure things, you can't manage them. And we have a lot to do. You know, we are very much Silicon Valley North here in Canada, and particularly in Ontario. We have a great artificial intelligence, great data and digital capabilities right here in Ontario, right here in Toronto, not far from here, in Waterloo, in Ottawa, and many other parts of Ontario. So we have to use that as a competitive advantage as we move forward. And I feel strongly about that. You know, government is a very complex organization. And right across the street from government is the private sector. And right across the street to the west is academia, represented by University of Toronto and all the great colleges and universities that we have. And in just a little while, some private benefactors donated $100 million to build the new artificial intelligence office right across from my office in Frost, up at Queen's Park. So my view now is blocked by an artificial intelligence building. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing because Ontario and Canada have such great competitive advantages. You know, we're able to work collaboratively across government, public sector, private sector, academia, to get better outcomes for the people of Ontario and for Canada. So know that we will continue in that regard. You know, I do know that we'll talk about a couple other things right now. One is that, you know, I've touched on how the environment is very difficult for people. And as you serve your clients, many of you serve clients in this room, you know, remember that times are tough, that we're looking at ways to put more money back in people's pockets to make life a little bit affordable. We've cut the gas tax, for example. We've indexed a number of social welfare programs to inflation, first time that's ever been done by any government. You know, we continue to find ways to reduce fees, like dropping the license plate stickers, you know, that took money out of people's pockets, and we'll continue in that regard. Devant vous, aujourd'hui, je peux affirmer que notre gouvernement comprend que les gens doivent déjà gérer de façon très serrée l'argent qu'ils ont durement gagné. And that's why we'll continue that work. I do want to talk about another area that our vision for Ontario is so paramount, and that is infrastructure and housing. You know, this great province has attracted so many people. If you're, other than Indigenous, everyone came from somewhere else. My parents came from war-torn Hungary, and I met Sándor, you're in this room somewhere, who came from Budapest 6 years ago, now works at FISRA, works in your supervisory area for credit unions. You know, as I travel around the world, one thing I keep hearing over and over again is how they view Canada. And they view Canada as a sea of stability, a beacon of hope for people, a beacon of freedom and democracy in a very troubled world. And that's why I think it's so critical that our government and our policies continue to focus on putting in place the conditions to grow whether people are here or come from somewhere else. And what does that mean? That means that we have to work on housing, and we have been. You know, a whole generation is finding it impossible to own a house. You know, when my parents came, and I wasn't born yet, you know, they met here in Toronto. You know, my first experience was living in Montreal, where my grandparents lived with 3 of my great-grandparents, plus my mother's brother. You know, multi-generational in one house, but they had a house. You know, my granddad and my father and my mother were able to find jobs. They were able to grow a family. They felt safe in this country. So I think we have to continue collectively supporting the environment to build more infrastructure, houses, the social infrastructure, healthcare, home care, long-term care, hospital beds, mental health and addiction. These are all important parts of our plan to build Ontario. We have to build more roads. We have to build more subways and transit, public transit. That's what we're doing. And we're doing it all simultaneously, because if we are going to continue to be the beacon of hope in the world and one of the great democracies of the world that Canada is, we got to be ready for everybody coming here. And that's a challenge that all of us in this room, my ask of all of you in this room, is to continue working day in, day out to support this great province in the way you do. Now, I'd like to stay longer, but apparently I have to go back to Queen's Park and take some tough questions in question period. But before I do, I'm going to hop over to the TSX, and I'm going to help open up the day and ring the bell. And the reason that I'm doing that is, of course, it's the Property and Developers Association of Canada Week. And why do I say all that? Because we're also very focused on the environment. We're very focused on building electric vehicles and the whole supply chain, including the critical minerals in the north, right through the battery manufacturing and the assembly of electric vehicles. And it's important that we also focus on the environment as we navigate these uncertain waters and climate change. Part of the insurance, I spoke with Paul, I don't know where you are, but you're right there, talking about catastrophic insurance. These things all intersect. And I would ask each one of you, in your role, whether you're at FSRA, and whether you're in the pension industry, the credit union industry, the life industry, the P&C industry, all the other industries that you represent here today, you're playing a role on building Ontario. You're playing a role on making and continue to make Ontario and Canada the greatest country on the face of the earth. Thank you, and have a great conference.